to love, I'd do most anything. 'Cause if you have it in your heart, you know you're a rich man. There's just not enough to go around the world today. And if we had a little more, you know, it'd be a better place. I can only go by what's happened to me. Now I realize when it comes to love.
The stories that you hear are so bad.
These children came from environments that were brutal.
Ano po yung, ano po ako ng customer, ano po, yung nasa isip ko lang po yung makakain ako sa isang araw 3 beses. Kahit po na nahiya po ako sa sarili ko, ginagawa ko po yun para po ako mabuhay.
It's very difficult to sit here and not get emotional about what they've come through and how young they are.
These girls as young as 8 years old are having sex 8 to 10 times a day.
That means that they're forced to do anything that a man will want.
A lot of them get pregnant, a lot of them get STDs, a lot of them will die of AIDS.
It's just disgusting that these people do this to children.
So this is what is going on in some dark corners of the earth. They were very poor, but she came from a normal family.
She was approached by a lady from Manila who offered her a job in a department store. And this was one of those times when they thought this is a gift from God, this opportunity.
Instead of taking her to a department store, the woman brought her to a brothel instead.
She was subjected to the most horrific things. She has very good English and she's very attractive, and this made her extremely popular, which worked tremendously against her.
Her family went looking for her because they did not hear anything about her.
Her brother and her father had tried to get her out of the brothel when they found out where she was.
Yung pamilya ko nadamay, yung ganun da.
And they turned up at the brothel, announced who they were and that they'd come to get her back, and they just were blocked out of the brothel, which was absolutely devastating.
She was freed from that situation because there was a raid by the police. When she first arrived, she was withdrawn and she was crying all the time. But little by little, she opened up and participated in the activities of the safe home. Eventually, her real self emerged. It's a beautiful self. It's a self that is concerned for other people. And when the proper time came, after assessment, we finally brought her home.
I'm fully recovered of everything.
The day that she was reunited, I wasn't there, but I've heard the story, that her blind mother just hung on to her and just wouldn't let her go, just said, "My baby, my baby, my baby."
I love him very much. Yung gagawin niya po kung ano po yung kaya niyang gawin tayo.
Of everything they'd been through and the fact that they'd had this daughter torn away, and they finally had her back. She had had this real smile, not a fake smile that she'd had to give men for years.
Naging maganda po yung buhay ko.
The fact that she was free and she'd started this new life, it was an utterly touching moment. And she went over to her mother, put her arms around her mum, and just started to sob. I started crying. I couldn't deal with it. I had tears dripping off my chin. But that was the kind of moment that it was. Turns big men into babies.
Children should be cared for. They should be in a family where they are loved. But that is not what's happening to millions of children around the world.
They come into the round home in all sorts of conditions.
One girl was trying to commit suicide all the time. Our backs were turned.
Kaya yun, hindi ko po matiis yung nasa loob ako ng bahay, kaya po pag-isipan kong maglaslas.
We aim to restore them, to bring back what has been lost as much as possible.
Opo, nung napasok na po ako sa center, sa round home po.
They have to just be so gentle from the moment they arrive to understand the girls and watch them come through this process.
The love they receive is really what heals them.
Treating them like a human being again, instead of a commodity to be bought and sold.
It is about life. They give life back to these girls. So how long should the process take? Until they've got their life back. That's what they're about.
And every time I come in, the kids are happy, jumping, playing sports, visibly healed.
Their life before were far from being peaceful. So we'd like them to feel peace.
What a terrible state they were, and how Love 146 has helped to save them.
What's the most powerful force on the planet? I think love is, and it's called Love 146 for that reason.
How is everybody? Welcome to the Gardyne Theatre, and thanks very much for coming along to this. My name is Grant Ritchie. I'm the Deputy Principal in Dundee and Angus College, and I'm here really just to introduce Jenny. But just a couple of words of context for me, just a couple of minutes. When I was at school, slavery was taught of as history. You know, it was images of ships leaving Western Africa, heading off to the Caribbean, heading off to the Southern American states. But it was taught of as history, as a period in time that was over, you know, that had happened and that had been ended, you know. And I think it's only very, very recently that the awareness that actually the movement of peoples, the enslavement of peoples, is still absolutely current and still involves millions of people across the world and far too many people in this country. So I'm delighted you're here to consider those issues and consider a lot of the issues around that. But I'm even more delighted that we've got Jenny Mara with us to talk to you and to answer some of your questions. Jenny's a great friend of Dundee and Angus College and supports us in all kinds of ways, you know, and she is also, as you can see, co-convener of the Scottish Parliament Cross-Party Group on Human Trafficking. So there's nobody better to talk to you about this than Jenny Mara. Thanks very much, everybody.
Good morning. Thank you very much, students of Dundee and Angus College, for inviting me here this morning. I'm delighted to be here to talk to you about what I feel is a very important issue in our communities, and I want to talk to you a bit about the issue of human trafficking itself, and I want to talk to you a bit about the action that I'm taking in the Scottish Parliament to try and make Scotland and our communities in Dundee and all over the country a very unsafe place for the practice of trafficking. A few weeks ago, myself and my friend Pauline went up into the centre of town to Tay Street, and we got on a bus. And as we were travelling on that bus through Dundee, a young African girl got onto that bus. She was about 14. And she was with an older African woman who she was calling Auntie. And as we travelled through Dundee, this young girl was talking about her hopes and dreams. She was I would say, a naive and vivacious 14-year-old, and she was talking about all the things she wanted to do, the great education she was going to have in Dundee, what she wanted to do when she left school. She actually said she was going to be a politician. I felt like saying to her, that's not a very good idea. But she was talking about all her hopes and dreams. And then we got to Millamains, and we went into a flat up there. and the girl was taken into a room and she was gang raped. And she came out of the room and into the room we were in and collapsed on the floor. Now, this was a play. It was a play called Roadkill, and it was a play about human trafficking in the United Kingdom. And this girl was playing the part of a 14-year-old who had been brought by the older African woman who was controlling her into the UK, into Scotland, into Dundee, and was being held for sexual slavery purposes. And she was then sold 10 times a day to men who came and paid to have sex with her. And as you saw on that video, I've heard one person say that for the criminal underworld, you can sell drugs and you get one hit out of selling drugs, but you can get hundreds of hits out of selling a woman for sex, hundreds and hundreds of times. And so the money that can be made is incredible. Does this happen in our communities? Is it happening in Scotland today? Yes, it is. But it's not just sexual slavery. There's domestic servitude and there's forced labour as well. I think it was Barack Obama who recently said that there are more slaves, there are more people in slavery in our world today than there ever has been at any point in our history. And Grant said before I came on stage that when he was at school, he learned about slavery in the context of when it was legal to own someone else, when it was legal to own someone else and control them and tell them what to do. 200 years ago in the United Kingdom, William Wilberforce abolished slavery. Despite that, we think there are more slaves in the world today than at any other point. Now, why is that? Human trafficking allows that to happen because human trafficking is the movement of people for money and it's control and coercion. But how do we deal with it in our communities? You know, if I was to go back up the road into the centre of Dundee and stand outside Boots today and speak to 12 different people and say to them, do you know that people are trafficked into our country and held and coerced to do things they don't want to do, like the video you've seen, like the situation I've just described? People wouldn't believe me. And we don't. And people don't believe it for very good reasons, because we believe in the humanity of other people. And we don't believe that something as horrific as that can happen to people. But when we live in a country that it does happen, and we know this does happen, there's one victim found every 4 days in Scotland. So this week, 2 victims across Scotland have been identified. And they might be involved in sex, they might be involved in forced labour, or they might be involved in domestic servitude situations where they've been kept in a domestic situation, being forced to be nannies to children or do cleaning, and all of these have their passports removed and not receive any proper recompense for that work that they're doing. So there's one victim every 4 days uncovered in Scotland, so we do know that this is happening. So how do we get people to understand it? And that's particularly why I'm happy to be here today, because I know that all of you are studying at Gardyne and Angus College and going into the caring professions. And since I started working on this issue 2 years ago, it's been very close to my heart that we must raise awareness of this. Because we do have human rights abuse in our communities. You know, human trafficking does happen, but the only way that it can be tackled is if people like you who are working in our communities, whether you're working with children or in schools or taking care of elderly people, it's only if everyone has an awareness that this can happen when you're going into domestic situations, that you would be aware that perhaps if everything doesn't add up to you, that there could be elements of trafficking there or other things. So what are we doing about this? Well, 2 years ago, a very eminent QC, a lawyer who's a Scot, and she's a QC in London. Some of you may have heard of her. Her name is Helena Kennedy. She wrote a report for the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and it was called An Inquiry into Human Trafficking in Scotland. And that report I read that report, and that really sparked my interest in the subject. Helena Kennedy said, this is a problem in Scotland, our police aren't uncovering it, but we know that it is a problem, so what can we do? And she put down a few recommendations. And from Helena Kennedy's report has come the bill that I am now putting through the Scottish Parliament. Now, this bill is in its consultation period, and what that means is I've put down a proposal for a piece of legislation, and now people in the community are saying what they think of it. So people who work with victims of trafficking, the police, the Crown Office that are responsible for prosecuting people, church groups are involved, and there's a whole variety of people are responding to that. And I've put down some proposals. And in the new year, all their responses will come back, and then I'll put down a proper bill before Parliament to be debated. So what will that bill include? Well, this bill, human trafficking, is the first human rights bill that the Scottish Parliament will consider. The Scottish Parliament has been open since 1999 and it's never had a human rights bill before it before. And I think that is because, as I said earlier, that we don't believe that human rights abuses can happen in our own community. We see ourselves as a civilised country. So what the bill aims to do is to, most importantly, have a proper service for victims. So victims of human trafficking at the moment get support from agencies, but there's no legal right to that support. So it will give victims a legal right in the law to get support. The second thing it will do is to clarify the law. There is no proper definition of the crime of human trafficking in Scots law at the moment. And so it will embed the international gold standard definition of human trafficking, which is called the Palermo Protocol, into Scots law, which gives police a much better understanding of what the crime of trafficking is, and it allows them to go out into the communities and pick up people who are traffickers. The third thing it will do is it will make it illegal to prosecute victims. And I'm going to tell you a story here because I think this is one of the most horrific things about this issue. Because in our jails tonight in Scotland, the prison warders will lock up 5 people in Scotland who are responsible for the crime of human trafficking. So they are the traffickers. They are people who have brought others to this country and have sold or coerced them to do certain things. 3 of them were convicted in Dundee Sheriff Court just last summer, and it was for crimes of forced marriage. One of the guys is nodding, you obviously read about this case. So there are 5 people in our jails tonight who have been convicted of human trafficking. But when the prison warders go around at 4 o'clock this afternoon to lock up people for the weekend, they will lock up 10 victims of human trafficking. We have double the amount of victims of trafficking in our jails tonight than we do people responsible for the trafficking itself. Now, why is that? The Anti-Trafficking Monitoring Group, which is one of the bodies that delves into the issue and writes reports on this issue, this summer published a big report. And it talked about some Vietnamese boys who were trafficked into the United Kingdom, were trafficked into Scotland, ended up in Inverness-shire in a domestic property in a house, were cultivating cannabis, but were being forced to do so by the people who trafficked them. As you might expect, the police busted the house. The Vietnamese boys were taken out. They were put in the cells. They were then up in the sheriff court. They had lawyers to defend them. The sheriff said, "You're guilty," and they went to jail. And they're in Polmont tonight. Some people who are trafficked actually don't know what country they are in. They don't know that they're in Scotland. They don't know that they're in the United Kingdom. They have very poor English. Their passports are taken away from them. They have no freedom of movement to get out. They have no freedom to communicate with anyone back home. So we know that there are 10 victims in our jails. However, this became illegal on the 6th of April this year. The European Union, which has done a lot of work on human trafficking, passed a directive. And it said that in every EU member state, all 27 member states across the European Union, all member states should make it illegal to prosecute these victims of human trafficking. So these Vietnamese boys that I'm talking about, they shouldn't be in Parliament tonight. However, our law is never that simple. And I've been asking the Justice Secretary, Kenny McCaskill, if in Scotland that we are compliant with that. He has given me various answers that haven't been all that clear. So another thing that my bill will do is to actually put it in Scots law that we cannot prosecute victims of human trafficking in our courts. Now this of course throws up a whole host of problems. Those of you who are thinking this through will be thinking, well, what if actually somebody came, you know, as an immigrant and said, actually I've been trafficked, but was here of their own volition and wanted to be here and wanted to be cultivating cannabis. And there are all these problems, and a lot of people involved in this call this moral hazard. That's the phrase they use for it. And that is a problem. But our position is that that shouldn't prevent us having robust human rights laws to deal with people who are victims and to make sure that they get the help that they need and that they don't end up in our jails because they have been victims of this human rights abuse. I want to digress a little bit from the issue of human trafficking, if you'll allow me to do so just for a minute, because I want to talk more generally about the issue of human rights. Because again, I said I would go into the centre of town and grab 12 people outside Boots, and you know, the general understanding of this kind of thing in our communities is that human rights abuse don't happen. We're a civilised nation, you know, we are a generally prosperous nation, and human rights abuses are things that happen in Libya, in Syria, and in other parts of the world where it's much more chaotic. But this week in the Scottish Parliament on Tuesday afternoon, the Scottish Government presented its strategy for human rights in Scotland. It's a 10-year strategy and it looks at a whole host of things. One thing it didn't mention was female genital mutilation. Now, I don't know if all of you are familiar with female genital mutilation. Some of you are nodding. But in some communities, in some countries in Africa, they take young girls and they cut out their clitoris. And it's not a medical procedure, and it's done in some countries that is actually done with the side of a Coke can, if you can imagine, or scissors. Yes, and some of you are wincing. I did too when I heard about it. But it does also happen in our country, because some refugee communities it is still prevalent. So what can happen is it is being done in Scotland, in Edinburgh and Glasgow. Little girls as young as 5 are being taken and having their clitoris cut out. It causes horrific injuries, as you can imagine, bleeding, and the girls are sewn up again, and it causes them problems, as you can imagine, right through their adult lives. This is still happening in Scotland, but also girls are being transported back to home countries like Senegal and Sudan to have this done. Now, this is illegal in Scotland, as you can well imagine. It is completely illegal, and it is actually illegal under Scots law as well to take a young girl back to Senegal or Sudan, have it done to her there, and then bring her back to Scotland. If she's resident in Scotland, that's also a crime under Scots law. But nobody has ever been prosecuted for this in Scotland, not one person. And the police, if you go down the chain, have never filed a report to say that this is happening. But we know that 3,000 women and girls in Scotland are at risk of this. And I tell you that story because you're going into the caring professions. And I tell you because we have got to have awareness, I think, that human rights abuses do happen in our own country. And multiculturalism isn't an excuse for ignoring human rights abuses. So if you are working where you see signs that children may have been taken away for lengthy periods of time, that is when these things happen. They predominantly happen during the school holidays where there's time for them to be taken away. So I tell you so that you are aware, but I also tell you because human rights abuses do happen. And that's why I'm taking this bill forward on human trafficking, because I think it is important that we face up and address the fact, we don't overblow the fact, but we address the fact that these things are happening. The thing I like about the bill that I'm putting through the Scottish Parliament, and I didn't write this bill, the experts wrote it, is that it takes all the power of the Scottish Parliament, all the power of our devolved settlement, and it drills down into our communities. Because there are many people who say that the issue of human trafficking is an immigration issue. It should be dealt with on our borders, and people who are trafficking people just shouldn't get in. But it's never as simple as that. As you'll probably be aware, and as I'm aware, criminal gangs are much more clever than that. And when there's a lot of money at stake, they will find ways and means of transporting people about and exploiting them. So it's not good enough to deal with the issue on our borders. We need to deal with the issue in our communities. So our nurses, our police, our people who go in and inspect houses of multiple occupancy, they all need to be aware of the signals of human trafficking so that they can identify victims and so that they can give the police information on how to catch the traffickers. We need to have more robust laws, and most importantly, we need to get the victims the help and the legal right to support that they need. So that is what my bill intends to do. I'm hoping that it will come before the Scottish Parliament, all being well, in the springtime, and that we'll debate it. I'm hoping that I'll get enough support to pass it into law. It will be the first human rights law bill in the Scottish Parliament, and I hope that for the victims in our communities that we're identifying, that we do manage to make it law and make it a success. I'm going to stop talking now because I'd rather we had a conversation, and so I'm happy to open up to any questions or conversation that you want to raise. Is that okay? Okay. Does anyone want to ask me anything, or tell me if I've not covered, if there's anything I've not covered or not been clear about, or I'm happy to go into more detail. But I don't know if that's helpful. Does anyone have a question? That's the police's job, you know, and that's the job of the police and also the lawyers and the prosecutors and the judge when they get to court. Yeah, differentiating who is genuinely being trafficked and who hasn't. That is a problem. I was down in London 2 weeks ago giving evidence in the House of Commons to the committee that are putting together, because David Cameron wants to put together a modern day slavery bill on the anniversary of William Wilberforce as well. And there was a Tory MP who was asking me that exact question, right? And they call it moral hazard. What do you get if this person does want to be here illegally and cultivating drugs and all that? And I was saying to them, but that is no reason not to put the law in place to protect those who have been exploited. I mean, you saw that video, the exploitation that some people suffer as a result of this is just harrowing. It is horrific, you know. And so we can never in our law say we can't put protections in place for vulnerable people who need it because some people might exploit it. That's why we pay our judges very good money to make these decisions and make decisions on the evidence. So I would say to you that is no reason not to put the law in place, but that's a job for the police, for the lawyers and for the judges. Does that make sense? Yeah.
You know how you stated the law earlier about the EU?
Yeah.
The EU law, do you think that will still be a law if Scotland becomes independent? Ooh, a microphone. I'm everywhere now.
You are everywhere.
How you stated the law about the EU?
Yeah.
The EU law.
The directive, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that will still be a law if Scotland becomes independent and if we break away from Britain for the European Union? If it'll happen.
Now we're getting into the independence question. No, Grant will tell me off. If Scotland becomes independent and is still a member of the European Union, European directives will be enforceable in Scotland. But it depends on whether Scotland becomes a member of the European Union. The SNP and the Yes campaign are saying that they want to become a member of the European Union. We on no side are saying we understand that, but we're not convinced that you would have all the negotiating powers you would need to get in as we are now, right? So that's a whole debate. But I think the intention is if Scotland becomes independent, they would want to be a member of the European Union, and therefore EU law would be enforceable under the treaties. Yes.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it did.
It's very interesting what you were saying about the female. I'd rather just talk.
Can use the microphone because I can hear you better. Sorry.
Can I use it?
Please, if just I can hear you better.
There was a very good programme on radio very recently about the whole issue of the female genitalia issue. And what was really shocking about that is that not only is it happening in Scotland, there seems to be evidence that Scotland is becoming a centre where people are being brought, even from abroad, in some of the countries where the laws are becoming stricter, they are being brought into Scotland and for that to be performed.
That's right.
And I think the other thing is that I'm sure there is a great deal of education that needs to be done with the police force, because women being trafficked into Scotland to work in brothels in our cities has been going on for years, and Scottish men have been frequenting these brothels for years. And in some cases, some of these brothels, where they're located in, for example, Edinburgh, are even right across the road from police stations. So, I mean, I firmly believe that there has been knowledge and not enough action has been taken, and it's been a kind of acceptance, you know, that it's something that goes on undercover. So just 2 points I wanted to make. Thank you.
No, I think you're absolutely right. First, on the point of female genital mutilation, yes, you're right. There's a very dedicated journalist who's a lovely woman, Lucy Adams. She works for the Herald, has been doing a lot of work on female genital mutilation, and Lucy told me a few weeks ago that she actually thinks the issue of female genital mutilation, that human rights abuse, is 10 years behind where the issue of human trafficking now is in awareness, because we know it's happening in Scotland, and she uncovered the fact that Scotland's seen as a soft touch on this. So little girls have been brought up from England and from parts of Europe to have it done in Scotland because they're pretty confident that the police aren't going to pick this up, and that, you know, they'll just get away with it and they'll be able to take them away again. So that there's not enough police enforcement and prosecution. And that was something I raised at length in the Scottish Parliament on Tuesday, and I'm pushing the government into taking much more action. Because it's a good example of what you see. I mean, myself as a politician, we can pass as many laws in Scottish Parliament or in Westminster as we want. But unless people are enforcing these laws, unless the police are enforcing the laws, and unless people like yourselves who are going out to work in the community have awareness that these are crimes and know what to look out for, then nothing will ever happen, because female genital mutilation is a crime in Scotland, but as I said, there have been no prosecutions and not one police report on it. So what's the point in it being a crime if nobody's ever brought to book and the victims aren't protected? On the second point about the, you were saying that it's been happening for years. Yes, I think you're right. And I think it's good that we're at the stage that we're considering legislation on this and taking action.
This issue is now...
I'll come to you. Sorry. No, I'll come up to you in a minute. On you go.
This issue is still taking place with young girls and women, but what about young boys, for example, Afghanistan children, who are made to dance and maybe do particular sexual acts with men? Because that's their preference as well. So these things are still happening with young boys and with men. I mean with relation to them coming here for that need. It's not just girls that are needed.
Yeah, no,
it's also affects boys and young men.
You're absolutely right. Trafficking is an issue that predominantly affects women, but not exclusively. I think it's about 70% of trafficked people are women. But yes, there are children brought into domestic servitude as well, which is just it's Victorian, it's archaic, you know, this idea that you could bring children into a domestic situation and have them working for nothing, or, you know. But yes, it is men, it is boys as well, but it's predominantly women. It is a gender issue. Yeah.
After children are cared for, what would
That's a very, very good question. I'm not an expert on this area about the exact, but there are whole laws proposed about the amount of days that that people can stay, and if they are deemed to be a victim, if they can then claim asylum in the country like here. But what my bill plans to do is to put these legal rights in law for that support, so people have much more access and a legal right to access the support and all that information that would be needed, and that support would be there for them. But yes, some would be sent back to home countries if it's safe, but others might stay if it was more appropriate for their long-term recovery and well-being. Yeah. Yeah.
So what about the boys that are in like Poland just now?
Yeah.
Will they have to do their full sentence? Like, do they need to, even if it was human trafficking,
yeah.
that's kind of a coffee,
yeah.
would the judge see it as like, that isn't their fault?
That's another very good question. That was a question in my head when I heard about these Vietnamese boys. I thought, these boys are in our jails and they shouldn't be there. What can we do? So I asked a human rights lawyer to come and meet with me to see if we could possibly look to appeal their cases. The cases are complicated, and for various reasons we can't appeal those cases. Some of the sentences have already been spent, have already come to an end for the drug offences. And so what has happened to these guys now? I don't know. They've gone back out into the community. They may be still under the control of traffickers, or they may have managed to escape. But what we're doing, to answer your question, myself and two lawyers, Kirsty and Lorna, are working with me on this, is we're looking out for a test case. Because a test case is really important on this, because if the government don't put my bill into law and don't enforce that right for victims not to be prosecuted in our courts, it can still happen. Even though there's an EU directive, it's still happening now, so it can still go on to happen. But if there's a test case brought to our courts, it creates a stooshy, basically, about the fact that there's a victim of human trafficking in our courts. So we're still looking out for that test case to see if we can appeal it. Unfortunately, that seems, but that's the way the kind of law works, you know, that people can get away with these things unless it is actually tested in court.
See how some of the children can be set away for a while or taken away for a while? After they've had the support that they needed, can they go back into education or get like the support that they need? Because they'll have missed their education.
Yeah.
So will they get the chance to do that?
Rehabilitation in this country, yes, we'd look very much at getting people, you know, out of that situation into safe accommodation, into a safe domestic situation, and rebuilding their lives. So education would be a big part of that, yes.
As people who are going into the caring profession, what telltale signs would you say to look out for things like this?
That's another very, very good question. So the telltale signs you would look out for are people who are, I would say, emotionally stressed, don't seem to have much freedom in what they can do, seem to being controlled by another one person. I mean, the difficulty is that I think so many people who are trafficked are held in situations that they will see very few other people. And they are also, and this is one of the biggest problems with victims of human trafficking in Scotland, they're very reluctant to identify themselves to the authorities. So we might think that if you were being held in those circumstances, you would suddenly be looking for the first person you might see in a position of authority, like a social worker or a nurse if you managed to get out to the GP, or a policeman if you were allowed to go down to a local shop and you saw a local policeman or whatever. But victims of trafficking are very, very, very reluctant to self-identify themselves to the authorities, because they're fearful for the repercussions that will happen to them physically when they do return. Like if that conversation with the policeman isn't successful. They'd return to the domestic situation, and the person who's controlling them is probably aware that that happened. They're nervous about repercussions both physically on themselves, but they're also very nervous about repercussions on their families back home. Because remember, this is big criminal international operation, and people are being brought internationally. And families in poorest countries in the world are often convinced that their son or daughter or niece or nephew will be given a better life in the UK or in France or in Scotland, and then they're moved around Europe. And so the people who control them, the traffickers, use the threat of reprisals on their family back home. And you know, you or I would be in the same situation if your actions were potentially going to impact on your younger brother back home. It would make you a lot more reluctant to go and identify yourself. So, I mean, there's an incredible woman called Brona Andrew who runs Tara, which is the victim service in Glasgow. And I've got to know Brona very well over the last couple of years, and she said to me, this is the biggest problem, because women especially are frightened to identify themselves to authorities. And they're also told that the police are corrupt in Scotland, and you know, you can't trust anybody. You know, it's all of this. They're very insecure about their ties to the outside community and very much controlled. It's a difficult thing to spot, but all of those things, I would say emotional abuse, a kind of sense that they're being controlled by one other person, all of these things would add up to that situation, but it's not an easy thing to identify. A few months ago, about 6 months ago, I had been asking Police Scotland if they train their officers, their police officers, in human trafficking, if they make them aware of human trafficking. And Police Scotland were saying to me, yes, 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 we train our police officers in human trafficking. They know what to look out for, they know what to spot. And I said to them, well, I want to come along to the police training college at Tullyallen and see you do this, see you train your officers. And they put me off and they put me off, and then a phone call from the Deputy Chief Constable of Scotland saying, can we just talk through this on the phone? And I said, no, I don't want to talk through it on the phone. I want to come to the police training college and I want to see it happen. Eventually, 6 months later, they invited me down to the police training college on a Friday morning, and Roy, who's up there in the audience, works for me. Roy and I drove down from Dundee to Tullyallen one very rainy Friday morning at 9 o'clock, and we went into a room, and there were 12 police officers sitting there. They were all men, right? I've told you this is a gender issue. Most of the victims are women. All the police officers were men, and they were being told about human trafficking. And they were getting the ABCs on human trafficking. They were being introduced to human trafficking, right? And so they got their presentation, and then they started asking questions as we're doing. And then I discovered that these police officers weren't the police officers that are on the beat in Dundee and Inverness and Glasgow. These were the police officers that are on our borders. You know, if you take a flight into Edinburgh, you get to the airport, and there's always somebody from UK Border Agency and from Police Scotland. Or if you go into the port of Stranraer, there's always a police person on our borders. These border police were being told about human trafficking for the first time. For the first time. And I'm convinced they pulled this session together because we hassled them to do so, right? So there needs to be much more training and much more awareness. Does that answer your question? Okay. So it's not easy for you to identify, but it's not easy for the police either, and that's why there needs to be a lot more training. Another part of my bill is that it mandates the Scottish Government to put a strategy before Parliament every 3 years on how they're going to deal with this. And I would see that strategy being training nurses, better training for police, and all of our public services to have a better understanding and awareness of the crime and the victims. How are we for time?
We're okay for time at the moment, but I think we maybe need to move on because we have a couple of other things to do. Are you going to be around at the end in case people want to ask you questions individually?
Absolutely.
I know that some people are beginning to get a wee bit worried about having lunch before they go to classes this afternoon and do assessments this afternoon, so we don't want to sort of continue this. But yes, I've just got a couple of wee things to say. I will try to resist my normal temptation to speak too much. and just say really thank you very much for this. I'm June Anderson. I think most of you probably know who I am. We have a lot of care students here today, Jenny, but we have other students who are doing other things. I think we need to thank you for your vision, because this is a very important matter. We don't like to think this happens in Scotland, do we? We don't like to think this happens in 21st century Scotland. We pride ourselves in being a country that stands up for equality and fairness and human rights, but unfortunately, we don't really always live up to that. I think that now that we know about this, we can't ignore it, can we? We need to think about what we're going to do. And in a couple of seconds, Kenny Doggerel is going to introduce some ideas of how we can maybe take this forward. But you've touched on a lot of the things that I was going to say, which were only 2 or 3 things anyway, but why care students? You are the people who are going to be out there meeting members of the public on a day-by-day basis. If you're going to be teachers, nurses, childcare workers, social care workers, social workers, whatever. You will be the people who are out there in the communities. And today, we are going to give you the right to be nosy. You need to be listening and looking. People don't come forward and say, excuse me, can you help me, I'm trafficked. They probably can't even speak English. And they certainly won't be able to speak Scottish. So what we need to do is, when you're visiting somebody, or when you hear people speaking, think, that doesn't sound right. If somebody's saying to you, there's a house next door, I know there's a wee girl in it, but we never see her. She's never out. There's a teenager there, never gets out. I'm sure there are more people in there. There seem to be an awful lot of men coming and going from that house. Be nosy. You could be the person who is one of the people who is saving these 1 every 4 days. And let's make it 1 every day until we find where they all are. Okay? The consultation, Jenny, can people, it's too late for people to be involved in the consultation, and how do we go about that?
If you go onto my website, which is just myname.com, you'll find it on Google. There's a human trafficking page, and the proposal is there, and you're welcome to put your thoughts and send them to me, and the deadline for that is the 6th of January.
Okay. It's not very much time, but have a look at it. If you've never been part of a consultation, it's really quite easy. You just go in and put what your thoughts are there. And if anybody needs any help to do that, I'm sure the tutors or lecturers will help them with that. The other question I was going to ask, might it be possible for some of the college students to be present when the bill is presented to Parliament?
I would love that. That would be great.
Yeah, is that something anybody would be interested in?
That would be great.
A few people? Yes. Well, let's see if we can organise something like that. I think that would be possible to do that. So thank you very much. I think Ken is going to come forward, and there's going to be another short video, and Ken Doggerel, who's one of my colleagues at the college, teaches maths here. So he's everybody's favourite lecturer, isn't he? Because you all love maths, don't you? And then he's going to put forward some ideas of how we as a college, Students' Association, staff, students, can maybe take this forward and really make a difference. Thank you very much,
Can I thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
Love 146 works toward the abolition of child sex slavery and exploitation through prevention and aftercare. Love 146 protects children across Asia, the US and Europe by developing and sustaining targeted prevention projects in high-risk communities. Love 146 defends the rights of the vulnerable through advocacy, prevention and effective action. Love 146 restores hope to survivors through holistic aftercare and training caregivers. The Love 146 Round Home provides therapy, a sense of family, and a space to thrive. Love 146 empowers survivors through education and viable employment opportunities, equipping them to transition back into communities. Love protects, love defends, love restores, love empowers. We are Love 146.
When it comes to love, I'd do most anything. 'Cause if you have it in your heart, you know you're a rich man. There's just not enough. Go around.
Yeah, you fell over there. Hi. How you all doing?
And if we had a little
This song was playing as you came in this morning, and I don't know whether any of you... it's still going. Could sing along a little, perhaps. But I better not, because you'd run screaming from the building. Cool. Right, don't have much time, so I better get on. Yes, a few lines from that song I will share. Cry a little, hurt a little, feel a little pain in your heart. There's been some of that this morning. Some of you have been challenged by what you've seen, and some of you it's quite an emotional response. More about that in a minute. That's not in the song, I added that. Feel a little pain in your heart, laugh a little, care a lot, take a look at what you've got. It's true we're human, we make mistakes, but we're going to live to see a brighter day. It's one of the most positive songs. There's loads out there, but this is particularly apt today, I feel. It goes on to say, when it comes to love, I can build a world with you by my side. That's about collaboration as well as love, obviously. I don't know what was in the mind of the songwriter when he wrote this. It might have been like, a couple love thing, but I'm using it in a more universal sense for our purposes today. We can build a world together with you by my side. When it comes to love, together we can start a fire that will light up the night, lighting up the dark night, shining a light on this terrible crime of human trafficking and child exploitation, and never underestimate the power of one. And we've heard quite a bit today about different people throughout history that have changed history, and they were one person. They had some backroom staff. Yeah. Together we can start a fire that will light up the night, so do what you got to do. Do what you got to do. Hey, do you know what? Abolition, I've been studying it just recently. It has a pattern. It has a formula for success. It starts with education, and then once people are educated, they create awareness. So we've got education, then awareness. From that stirs activism, which is simply action to achieve a goal. That's what activism is. Action to achieve a goal. And during that activism curve, as that increases and increases, laws are made and laws are changed. And then you have the change of hearts and minds. And we've seen that throughout history with women's rights, with women's equality at work, equality of opportunity, and hearts and minds of people have been changed and will continue to be changed. And that's what ends the evil. That's what ends. In our case, we're going to put this formula in place. It's already been going for a few years, but you'll notice in the press across the world, there's people rising up to abolize. To abolize. Abolize is engaging in the work of abolition. It's not in the dictionary. It's a new word. It's been invented very recently. Okay, abolize. And who's interested? Really? You know? Who has been so moved today? Just give me a wave. Who's been so moved today that they're not prepared to carry on with their life without doing something about it? Just give me a wave. That's fantastic. You must be students, young people, you know? They're the best people to abolize, not us old fossils, you know? But it takes everyone. And like the power of one, that's like the power of 100 straight away or more, okay? That's really good news, and that's fantastic news, because we are going to do something about this. We are going to do something about this. Some of you have been so impacted that you have to do something. That's great. At the tail end of that video there, it was Martin Luther King Jr. said, "We are not satisfied, and we shall not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." What he's talking about there is abolition. He's talking about activism. And can you imagine standing under a mountain stream and trying to stop the water coming down? Not possible. In the same way, nothing is going to stop the abolition of this human trafficking and child exploitation. It will end, because in the same way as all these other things have gone through the abolition curve and have ended pretty much in our society, there's still some die-hard sexists who say, no, women should not work. They do still exist, believe it or not, but it's not the majority. But if you go back 100 years or so, it was definitely the majority. See? That's changed hearts and minds. So we put the formula in place, and it will change. You know, people say, end it, we're going to end slavery. Now, some people are shouting and saying that, not all, but some are saying that, and they haven't really necessarily processed it or believed that it can be true. But it is true. It is true. It will end, and it will follow the same process, the same formula for success as other abolition movements have over the years, over hundreds of years. Education, awareness, activism, passing of laws, changing hearts and minds. And as Struan Robertson said in the first video, the greatest force on the planet is love. So we wrap the whole thing in a bundle of love, and that gives us the power to make the change. Good, eh? So what we're going to do, back in June, we made a presentation to the executive board of the college, talking about this and thinking that the students who are going to be interested in doing this, doing something about it. And they loved the idea, and Grant himself came out and started us off for today, because that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to start our own volunteer expression of Love 146, and we can get educated. We can, you know, each one to their own. Some people say, right, I want to raise money. Some people say, I want to learn more. We can do all of that. That's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to have our own volunteer expression of Love 146, and we're going to change the world. You can't stop it. You can't stop it. It's going to follow the same pattern as other abolition movements before. You will not stop it happening, but you can be a part of it. Thanks, Mark. Mark, give everyone a wave. You might have thought that was a bit random, but there's a reason for that. If it wasn't for Mark, we wouldn't be here today. We would still do this, but we wouldn't have done it today, because Mark knows Jenny. So this happened maybe a couple of months before we thought it would. But I'm glad, because it just kind of boom, and here we are. And it's amazing. So I've probably talked for far more than 10 minutes already, have I? No, great, excellent, thank you. On Monday, in the college here, at 12:15 in Lecture Theatre 1, if you have been so moved that you cannot now do something about it, that you cannot not do something about it, good job I don't teach that communications thing, eh? If you have to do something about it, then come. Right, very, very quickly. Never underestimate the power of one or even three. 1 year ago, 3 young people decided to raise £50,000 to put towards restorative care in the UK, using some of the techniques that you've seen a little bit about on the videos in the UK. They ran 1,000 miles across Eastern Europe. But they failed dismally in raising £50,000. They only raised £193,000. Not bad, eh? Not bad at all. Now, we were in maths the other day, some folk and I in here, and we did some sums. If only 5% of the student body get enough sponsorship, let's say they know somebody that works in one of these companies in the town or something, and they get a sponsorship of £1,000, yeah? Let's say they only get £500 in total, and it's only 5% of the entire student body that do this, whatever it is. We will raise £350,000. Can we do it? There's nothing to stop us. There are absolutely no limits on what we can achieve, particularly if we're doing this education, awareness, activism, law, all wrapped up in love. The most powerful force, not just on the planet Earth, but actually in the universe. I could talk about nuclear physics, but we don't really have time. So on Monday, Lecture Theatre 1, 12:15, please come and play your part in changing the world. I mean that most sincerely. There is no limits on what we actually will achieve. I believe we will achieve abolition in your lifetime, because everyone's going to get educated, everyone's going to become aware, and there will be no place for the darkness to hide. You go downstairs in the night into your kitchen. It's pitch black, but you want to go to the fridge. You open the fridge door, because you know where it is roughly. All the light from the fridge floods into the house, see? So we're going to do the same thing with evil things, and the light will drive out the darkness. Would you like to come on Monday? Because you'll find out some really exciting things about what we're going to do. And even more importantly than that, it'll be you bringing your ideas, your creative talents, your dreams, your hopes. You know, when do you get a chance to actually make a difference in your life, really? How many of us have actually stepped up and said, right, I'm going to make a difference with my life? How many of us want to do something inside? We want to do something. We're at college, we're learning, what am I going to do in the future? This is an opportunity for you to really change something. So I'd really like to see you there. Come along 12:15, Lecture Theatre 1, and we'll change. First of all, we'll just start with our country, okay? And then we'll, maybe do more elsewhere as well. There's no limits. Got to introduce you to somebody, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce you to your student president, Mr. Graham Ramsey.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ken. I'm not going to take up a lot of your time. I know you're all dying to get away now. So I've only got a few people to thank for this event. So first of all, I'd thank Grant Ritchie for a wonderful introduction, Alan Deere, Jim Taylor for the use of this fantastic theatre, and to our ushers as well, who made sure we all got in fantastic. So thank you very much to them. Next, I'd like to thank Graham and Ewan for making sure that we're all seen and heard here today. Without them, it'd be pretty crap. So thank you very much. And also to the staff who helped organise and run today's event as well. So thank you very much to them. And of course, I have to thank Jenny Mara, without whom this really wouldn't have gone ahead. She came here today and delivered a fantastic message on a crime that just cannot go ahead any further. And of course, I'd like to thank each and every one of you who came here today, gave up your time, and listened to something that was not easy to listen to. I sat in the back row and was almost in tears myself. You are the ones who will change the future. I know you can change the future. So together, let's do it. So thank you very, very much. Thank you.
I'd do most anything, 'cause if you have it in your heart, you know